This is Inner Healing Paths podcast. Here we discuss the healing of the mind, body, soul, and spirit through a variety of different paths. We have emotional and spiritually minded conversations centering on ancestral healing, psychology, astrology, yoga, meditation, magic, and indigenous spiritual practices of the world. I am your host, Rosa Shetty, and I am so happy you are here. Welcome. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. I am your host, Rosa, and for this episode, I had the opportunity to sit with Dr. Manuel Zamarripa and his wife, Jessica Zamarripa. They are the founders of the Institute of Chicana, Chicano, Chicanx, Psychology and Community Wellness. And in this episode, we talk about Chicanismo. We talk about the needs of this community, specifically the mental health needs of Chicanos. We talk about what does it mean to reindigenize, how we can get connected to our roots, and we talk about a decolonizing perspective on mental health, storytelling, and oral tradition. It is a packed conversation. I am so excited for you guys to listen to this. Please share your thoughts, anything that comes up for you as you're listening. Feel free to send it my way through email or through a DM on Instagram. For a brief disclaimer, I do want to remind you all that this episode is not meant to treat or diagnose any physical or mental health condition, and it is not meant to substitute for health or mental health services. Guests have a right to share their opinion and perspective, and this does not constitute an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. So without further ado, here's the conversation with Dr. Manuel and Jessica Zamarripa. Take a listen. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for your time and for your willingness to be here. Dr. Manuel Zamarripa. Sorry, I just butchered your last name. Zamarripa.
Yes.
Did I say that right? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Jessica Zamarripa. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks.
You. Yeah,
we're grateful to you and for all of the rostros y corazones that listen and that we weave together our energies to flourish our peoples in a good way.
Absolutely. So to get started, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the work that we do together is with the Institute of Chicana, Chicano, Chicanx Psychology and Community Wellness. And my name is Manuel Zamarripa. I am one of the co-founders along here with Rosa Jessica Zamarripa. And I'll just share a little bit about kind of the overall, what we try to do is we try to bring, so I'm a psychologist by training. And so we try to bring, at least we do this together, which we'll talk about, but my part, I think, is bringing a more culturally responsive, a more Chicano psychology perspective to the work of healing our people, of self-determination, and really also getting in touch again with our cultural identity, our cultural strengths. And I think all of that is part of the healing. So we do community plática workshops. We work directly with the community. And also we do trainings for mental health professionals and educators as well.
And organizations. And with permission of the cuatro direcciones, con permiso de los guardianes de este sagrado lugar, y con permiso de todos sus corazones, with permission of the four directions, with permission of the guardians of the sacred place where we are, which is our home, and with permission of all of your hearts and all of my ancestors, I present myself as Jessica Zamarripa, daughter of Jesse Zamora Aguirre and Maria Teresa Maldonado Montelongo, mother of Graciela Elena, Jesse Yaumikitzli Lino, and Joaquin Tlawitzmasat Maltin. And so hopefully I come in a good way. That is my intention. For my part of the work, so Manuel has come straight up academia, as PhD, doctor of psychology. And I have come straight up, mommy activism for 20 plus years, organizing community around Latina Chicana mothers and our kids, right, and our families. And also as a danzante de la luna, a moon dancer. And we're both danzantes mexicas ochipili, so we're both danzantes like Aztec dancers, and so are our kids, right? So bringing the ancestral medicine, right? As a moon dancer, it's one of my responsibilities to keep the ceremonies, the ancestral ceremonies, the ancestral rituals, the ancestral wisdoms, and to pass them forward, right? And to be of service to our community. So that is my part. And so we bring that together toward the well-being and the elevation and flourishing of our peoples.
And thank you for that and for opening the space for us. Thank you so much. And one of the, I think the first question that comes up for me, if you don't mind, just kind of describing, just to start off, right? Describing what is Chicano, Chicana mental health, and we can go from there. But just what would be in the most basic way or the simplest way? What is that? What is the difference, and how is that different from other groups of maybe Hispanic or Latinx? How would you differentiate Chicano psychology?
That's one of our favorite questions.
It really is. I think it's about, so like to give the context of what I'm going to say, it's always important for any group of people to know their identity and to know where they come from. It's very basic in that sense. So a lot of times, I think we have discussions like why Chicano, Chicanic psychology, because there's also Latino psychology or other psychologies, Latinx psychology. And it's never about being apart from, it's just understanding that there are times, especially in this society, in this country, where it's important for people to stand together for common goals, right? So that's where you have kind of this sense of different peoples of the Americas, who have certain histories here that may be common. We can come together for certain goals, and we can share certain values and certain commonalities, right? And at the same time, we have our own histories and our own peoples. So for us, Chicano psychology, Chicanic psychology is about that psychology of people that are now in this society of Mexican descent. And that's really important because people of Mexican descent have a very distinct history with, what is now the United States. If you want to go with the general kind of terms that we use today of, immigrants and immigration, of all the Latinx groups, those of Mexican descent, I always like to say, are both the oldest and the newest, quote unquote, immigrants. So it's just about honoring that distinct experience and not pretending that it's not distinct, just as our Puerto Rican relatives or our Central American relatives have the distinct experience. And so we can do both. And so for us, it's about knowing that, because for all of us, our histories are kept from us, our identities are kept from us in our schools. So let's be clear about who we are, what our identities are. And so in terms of psychology, it's about how all our cultural perspectives, those histories, the histories of our people, how that affects what we think of as wellness, what we think of as being in balance, what we think of as, even though our communities may not use it as much, but psychological health, you can say it in a lot of different terms, right? And then what we do is even, going past those kind of typical things we see in our history books, going all the way back, as Sotiani and I always say, like going right back to being indigenous to this continent, right? So Chicano, Chicanic psychology is also about that reconnection to our ancestral wisdom, to our indigenous wisdom, and knowing that our peoples ancestrally also had healing ways, tremendous wisdom about healing in what we would call today psychology or mental health. It's just, we use different terms. But there's a little more to it, but basically, in a very basic word, we use different terms, but our peoples have always had wisdoms about healing.
And for my part, yeah, I feel like we don't hear that enough, right? We don't hear enough that we can honor and center our own peoples. Usually we get washed out, and we call it the violence of erasure, being erased, not just from the history books, from the curriculum in our school experiences. Our children don't hear about their own existence. And the craziest thing is they are literally on their ancestral land, and they experience the violence of erasure. And you can ask many of us and we'll say, oh no, I'm not native to this land, I'm Mexican. And what the understanding of that, again, this is a traumatized identity that we have as a people, right? So people don't realize, yeah, you are Mexican and you are native to this land. And that's on purpose, because the colonial paradigm, the colonial matrix, which includes, capitalism, patriarchy, there's many pieces to it, wants to keep us separated from our power, right? And then we have internalized depression, where we continue to separate ourselves from our power, right? So the psychology of our people is extremely important. The mental health, the well-being, and what we say with the Institute of Chicanic Psychology, we've talked about the 3 pillars of well-being, which is identity, spirituality, and family. Those 3 things, and that's what we tend to focus on and build our pláticas, our talleres, our, community talks around those topics, because there's so much for us to learn about who we are as a people. And so that is really just a tip of the iceberg. Obviously, we could talk forever about that one question, but we can just leave it there.
No, I appreciate that so much. And as I'm hearing you guys talk, there's so much that is coming to mind. And one of the things that is coming to the surface now is just my own experience of when that identity as Chicana, or it is very different than just being Mexican from Mexico, right? Born and raised in Mexico, and then being first generation here. That I was not aware of until I think I was in middle school when I went to Mexico, central Mexico, to live with some family there for the first time. I had always identified as Mexican.
Right.
And then I went to Mexico and I was in school there. And there I was not Mexican to them. I remember, I don't know if this is an offensive term, but I remember I had never heard the term pocha.
Right. Yeah.
I had never heard of that, because my parents are from Mexico. They I mean, we didn't talk like that. And then when I was in Mexico, I heard that term for the first time. And that's when I realized, wait a minute, I'm not considered Mexican by people in Mexico, but I'm not considered American by people, back home in California. Right. So what am I? And I remember being, I think I was 13 or 14 and realizing that for the very first time. And that's when someone in Mexico told me, well, you're pocha or Chicana. And what are you? And I didn't know, as a teenager, I didn't know what I was, but I knew I was different. And I'm wondering, from your line of work, do you see that a lot now? I mean, this was back in the early 90s, so I'm sure I hope it's different now, but what is your experience now, with this? Do you still hear about this? People realizing, what am I, or questioning what they are, their identity?
Yes, I mean, and that's part of why one of the reasons why we talk about the importance of, many people are doing similar work, but for us, the work of the Institute, that's why is one of those reasons, because that has not changed. We still hear, and when we still encounter teenagers, that have the exact same experience, and that has been happening since at least the 1940s. So almost 100 years. So that goes to, again, that violence of erasure, that systemic ways that we encounter in this society that keep us from knowing that identity.
Mhm. Gloria Anzaldúa put it that soy ni de aquí ni de allá. So I'm not from here or there. And some other people say I'm both from here and from there. But then the way I say it is erasing that border, which is an imaginary border, right? That colonizers, invaders created. We're from this land. So if we realize that from the Southwest on down, it's called Anahuac, an Anahuac civilization, right? Meaning like surrounded by water. Anahuac, with different peoples in space and time, according to Guillermo Marin. You can look him up. He will teach you so much just from his videos alone.
What's
It's
his
in
name
Spanish
again?
too. Guillermo Marin. They are in Spanish. He's in Mexico. But he talks about we're an Anahuac civilization with different peoples in time and space. That's Zapoteca, Chichimeca, it doesn't matter, Maya, Mexica, whatever. And so we are Anahuac people from this land, right? So Mexican is a nation state, right? American is a nation state. But as a people, we're from this land. So I just want to transcend those borders, that have caused our peoples so much harm, the borders that have crossed us many, many times and changed, the borders that keep our families separated in cages and part of the prison industrial complex, those, what are those centers called?
Detention centers.
Detention center industrial complex, which is a part of that money-making complex. All of that, so transcending all of those borders and all of those imposed identities, to just remind us that we are a people of this land, of this continent.
I love that. In the erasure, that really, that concept, especially for me growing up, being a child of the 90s, it was, looking back, it was not even a discussion. Our history, the history of indigenous history, even beyond just the Christopher Columbus, to be honest. I mean, that's all I remember when we talk about indigenous cultures here in the Americas. And that, I think it was just a couple of years ago that you mentioned Gloria Saldúa. I think that was just a couple of years ago that I came to realize that whole body of research and knowledge that she presented, and how that's still not something that is common knowledge.
Right.
The idea that we are from here and from there, and is still not something that we all know, even people of Mexican descent.
Right, exactly.
And I was, one of the things that came up right now as you were talking is that I have family in Mexico, and the concept, the colonial mentality, I think it even impacts people living in Mexico.
Yes, absolutely.
You mentioned the ancestral healings, and just how we've had this history, indigenous culture and history in healing, in talking to just uncles, aunts that maybe are more educated or have, they're not connected to that, and they are in Mexico, central Mexico. They, they're teachers, or they do, but they almost like there's a dismissal of that, right? Of our indigenous ways. Like we've been conditioned to believe that is less, that is that we need to overcome that almost, right? Like we need to let that go and to in order to evolve. I don't know, what are your thoughts about that?
I mean, exactly. That's the thing, is that is what makes what we can talk about here in the work that we do and people here in what we call the United States about reconnecting to our indigenous ways as Chicanos, Chicanas. But the whole identity of being Mexican from Mexico is a colonized identity. Exactly.
Yes.
I mean, the fact that this whole country thinks of themselves as Mexican, as opposed to recognizing that they themselves are part of that indigenous identity, is the success, quote unquote, of colonization. So they are definitely, all of us on this continent are affected by that. And so in Mexico, or Mexico, and as in other countries that we call Latin America, the thing that we contend with probably the most is anti-indigeneity, like you were describing, right?
Yes.
And it's not to say that, because I think in this country, with our different racialized histories, it's important that we understand a lot of the anti-Black attitudes in all communities, right? And
Yes.
we address that, and that's important. And that is in a lot of countries everywhere.
That's a step in the right direction,
Right.
the right path.
And also different countries and different places have their own histories. And in a lot of ways, what is really prominent that we don't even talk about, not addressing issues and talk about the violence of erasure and being invisible, we have strong anti-indigeneity in Mexico and in our people.
Oh,
And-
God, very much so. And in this country, Latin America altogether,
right,
everywhere.
And I think the trick is that you acknowledge it a little bit, but you acknowledge it in a like two-dimensional caricature way. So what Mexico loves to do is, after like the Mexican Revolution, which was in some ways against a lot of European ideals, but don't go crazy. They still kept a lot of things in place. But what they love to do since that point, because before that point, you didn't even mention anything about anything, Indio or indigenous or Azteca. But what they did is, like, that's to come after that. Like, we're going to honor our indigenous roots. Now we have the Azteca Bank and the Azteca Theater, and we have the Azteca prints on the pesos and on the dollars to honor that part of who we are. But really, the indigenous people in the present, are oppressed and marginalized, kept in poverty. And we see them, we don't see us. We don't see them in us.
That's
so
right.
That's
right.
the best way to kind of have that anti-indigeneity, where it's like, well, we acknowledge them, those, and they love to kind of sometimes, like the Azteca Theater, and you just give a little here and there, but the reality, it's tokenism, right?
Yeah, and that's
Yes,
that's like
absolutely.
there are more than 68 different native peoples in Mexico, but you don't hear about them, you only hear about one peoples. And again, that is part of erasing our peoples of who we are. And even now here in this country, right? What do you say? What it would, or our elders say, unfortunately, not all of them, but when our kids are real dark when they come out. Ay, pobrecito, se ve muy indio.
Yeah.
But that's okay. He's
Yeah.
cute anyway. I mean, that's what was said about my kids, but what do you mean, but that's okay that they're brown? That is their beauty. That is their honor. That is their power, that they are brown and native to this land. It's just seen as an aside, like, ay, pobrecito, he looks, he looks Indian, or he looks native,
And
Oh, absolutely.
and I just want to say real
They
quick,
center whiteness, and they're always looking for who the Spanish relative is,
always,
or the French relative.
yeah, we always have
Right?
that
That's what you
person in our
oh,
family.
mi abuelito
Spanish.
tenía,
Ignoring all the curanderos, all the medicine work, all the remedios that the grandmothers did. Just don't talk about that.
right, absolutely.
For us, we hear these discussions in other, like, ways, like history and everything, but everything we've been talking about, that is Chicano psychology.
Exactly.
Because who are we? What are the things that we hold on to, connect to us that are actually true about who we are? And once you know that, then you have then that sense of self-determination, that sense of empowerment, that sense of
liberation
who you
and
are.
healing. And that's only one piece, because guess what? We are also barbecue and Big Red on Sundays. We are also the family sitting in the truck in the front yard, and everybody, singing and cooking food and barbecue. We're all of these things. We're this and we're that. And there's so much to be celebrated as powerful, and not viewed as we talk about often, as a deficit culture.
Yeah, I love that, because it speaks to that identity that we can claim, right? That in and of itself is our identity, right? The fact that we can claim that from our lands, right? The indigenous history and ancestors, but we can also claim what we've grown up seeing and experiencing, which is here, right? And then that concept that in and of itself, holding these two is our identity, is so powerful, and yet it's so abstract that I think a lot of people just can't even comprehend. It's almost like we feel like we have to compartmentalize, right? Like, well, I'm more American when I'm in this setting, and I'm more Mexican when I'm in this setting, or more Chicano, and it's like, no, that in and of itself, the fact that you can do all of that is your identity, is one. And I think that is when I just in my own experience, being able to understand that, and like I said, it's only been within the last few years, was so empowering. Just within my own journey, and exploring who I am, where I come from, and now as a mom, as a mother, what I want to pass on, right, to my daughter.
And wow, you really have to stay on that, because everything that they hear indirectly and directly with their friends in the school, on TV, things we don't notice, is going to try to counter those messages. Is going to try to erase those messages. And so, because I know, we've been, talk with parents where they are like, I don't know what happened. I told them, like who they are, but now they don't know, and they still feel disconnected, or they feel distanced from who they are, because a lot of the times it takes more than just like telling them and assuming that that's going to be okay. It's like you really have to integrate it into everything, or always check in, and always always kind of reinforce, and always kind of come back around to even the same things that you really want them to know.
And that's part of their mental health, right? Because our own son wanted to, when he was 8, now he's 21, but he wanted to dye his skin, bleach it, because he was dark, and he got these mega doses of messages of honoring who he is, but still, it's very pervasive. It's insidious. It gets in there, that internalized depression, in all kinds of ways that are invisible. And that's why we really work to bring the invisible visible. We never run out of Pláticas and Talleres workshops and community conversations about this, because it's so deep, it's so multi-layered, it's so multifaceted. And it's so, what is the word when something is pushed against or really tried to be squashed? What is that word?
I can't think of that.
I don't want to just say marginalized, because it's more aggressive than that. We can all think together as a community of what that word is, but
I mean, it's a form of racism, right? Just the erasure of a culture. That's it's a, I don't know, genocide. I don't know if it's too hard, but there's such thing as cultural genocide, right? There's the cultural genocide of that a lot of, just here in the Americas, what the indigenous communities went through, that's what they did, right?
Right.
The not just the oppression, but just erasing, trying to just block out that part of who we are.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. And
completely.
still now we're under attack with the, trying to get ourselves in the school book still so that our kids can see, and everybody
Still.
fighting that. I mean, still all of these elders who fought so hard in the 60s, 70s, 80s. We went to the La Raza Unida. We spoke at the conference, what was it, the 50-year anniversary of them forming their own political party, right? And we are still fighting for the same things that they were fighting for.
Yeah.
We are today still fighting for those same battles. So, there's a lot to talk about, to unpack, to heal, to expand, to flourish, to add to our abundance as a people so that we can have that liberation and that healing that we are always working toward.
And on your social media, I came across a term on your account, on Instagram, I came across the term reindigenizing.
Yeah.
And so I was wondering, how would you describe that process? Is it an intentional process? Is it something are there specific steps that someone needs to take? Can you describe what that is, what that looks like, and what is that? What is the intention behind that?
That's really good. These are really important questions, because as you said, a lot of the times for a lot of our people still, we were all at a point where this was new to us to some degree.
Yeah.
We were all at that point.
Reconnecting.
And so re-indigenizing is about reconnecting. And it's not like a particular framework. It's not like a particular kind of process that has been kind of written out or that all people follow in the same way. It is more of the general idea and concept, a real one, where what it means is first understanding that we have indigenous roots and we have indigenous background. If we're people of the Americas, 90% or so in some way or another. Remember, there were thousands of people living in what is now Mexico, and 500 Spanish soldiers that came invaded. A lot of the times we talk about, oh, we're half and half. That's not half and half, right? That's barely half and half. So one is recognizing that is a reality. And two is this revolutionary concept that there are still and always have been indigenous communities, as Jessica said, 68 at least in Mexico, that never went away. They're just in the shadows, or the Mexican government acknowledges them. But if you're a typical, barely, if you're a typical Mexican citizen, you could go your whole life without really connecting with the indigenous communities there. Maybe you see them at the mercados if they come into the cities to sell. So,
but you separate yourself.
But you separate. It's very easy. So it's understanding that indigeneity is a current reality.
That's powerful.
And then it's recognizing that because we've been separated, this is the question we always talk about, is a lot of us feel like, do I have the right to reconnect?
That's very common.
Simple answer is yes. So re-indigenizing is feeling okay, not co-opting and not saying, okay, now I'm indigenous. It's just feeling good enough, like fighting all those messages and all that uncomfortable, like that I can ask questions, that I can go investigate, that I can respectfully learn more about what does it mean to be indigenous? What are the indigenous wisdoms and ways that have been carried forward continuously? In the greater society, most of us were disconnected because you had the colonization. But as I said, it's like rivers, rivers in history through time. There have been continuous indigenous knowledges, communities, peoples that have continuously passed on those ways. And so for everyone, that can look different. It could be we live in the age that we live in. It could be starting with a simple Google, like what are the indigenous communities? what does it mean to be, for us, we start with the Mexica.
Mexica is an easy entry
The
way.
Aztec
Yeah.
Mexica, right?
Yeah.
And
It's a good
realizing,
place to start.
yeah, it's a good place to start, because probably in our day and time, in the way that even it's been colonized way of thinking in the United States about, for the northern tribes and peoples, it's like, what specific people do I belong to, right? Well, that can be an important, but it's not the all-encompassing, right? Because even though a lot of us may not necessarily be Aztec or Mexica, right? Because they were, just because they were the people in charge when the Spanish invaded.
For like 195 years.
Yeah.
But we have more than 10,000 year history.
Right. So all these things come up, and that blocks people, like, I don't know. It's like, that's okay.
It's okay.
Keep going.
Keep going.
Keep going. Reindigenize means I start from everything that I grew up with, all the messages that I learned, all the prejudices that I have about indigeneity. And just like here, prejudice reduction, we hear in the United States, right? Anti-racist work. That's our anti-racist work, right? And just continue moving forward. It doesn't mean now I'm going to pretend to be an indigenous person from 500 years ago.
Right.
No.
Right.
We start now, and we begin to incorporate the knowledge that we have,
The medicines,
the energies.
And also, like we make sure to say, it's not like you have to go back and live the way it was back then. No, that's ridiculous. You can't do that. It's impossible. And also that erases all of the surviving, all of the strong resiliencies that are a part of our mental health and our well-being now. All of the fight and the surviving that the people have done over the past 500 plus years, that our ancestors have done. We don't want to erase that. We want to honor that. So we don't go back and pretend like we're not here now. No, it's like we always say, it's a both and. It's a both and. So we connect and we honor, and this brings the fuerza, the poder, the power of who we are, because these ancestors, they were tortured, they were killed. The medicines, the codices, they killed the teachers first and the teaching tools first. And the women had to go and hide the fire in the kitchen to keep it alive. And then we had to run in several different directions, sacred directions, to preserve the medicine. So this oral history that was passed down, it was for you. It was for you right now, who you are. All of those thousands of pairs of ancestors looking at you and so proud and so ready to support you and who you are right now. So that is the beginning of what we say when we talk about reindigenizing.
Oh, so beautiful, Jessica. Thank you. That I think that is the key in regards to the message for those that are seeking to connect, right? That are seeking to find out where they come from, who they are in terms of their identity, right? And I don't know if you guys what are your thoughts about this, but one of the things that I've noticed is that there is also, even within our community of storytellers or healers, that there's gatekeeping going on. There's a lot of people that say, well, you can only practice X, Y, and Z, healing, or if you learn it from, this teacher. And I have conflicting thoughts about that, because, in one sense, yes, I think that there needs to be respect given to our elders and those that are, that have held, like you said, the oral traditions and are passing it on. But there's also, I feel that we've been, the younger generations have been denied this history, the erasure, right, that we were talking about for so long, that now that we have access to this, I feel like there's a hunger to know. And so I have a hard time with folks that are like, well, you can only practice X, Y, and Z if you learn it from an elder. But so many people don't have elders. So many people don't have anyone to learn it from. So they go online, right? And they research these healing modalities, and then they start maybe practicing it, maybe sharing it, and then they get shamed. And I see that, I'm not in any way I don't practice that, and I don't consider myself a healer in that sense, but I see it, I see it online, and I think it is a good thing for younger people to want to reclaim some of these healing, ancestral healing, indigenous healing modalities in whatever shape or form, because it's like that seed was planted, right? Or like you said, it's been shared for, like, I don't know, 500 years, right? And now people are like, well, I want to do it. I want to share it. I want to talk about this,
Yeah.
and I may not know it all, but I want to share it. And I do see a lot of gatekeeping going on. What are your thoughts about that? And what have you guys seen on your end?
So I really love that question because it is so complex and every piece of that answer is important. So yeah, 10,000 plus the 500 years, right, of history being passed down. There is such a hunger, and there's a reason for that. We're all waking up together. I call it the Gran Despierta. Typically, we have ceremonies at the age of 13, Chilonen and Telpocanesi, where at 13, it's called the Despertar del Niño, the awakening of the child, right? And we group our years in 13, so we typically have it then, but right now everybody's waking up, and we need that. We need each other. We need everybody to wake up and to reconnect, and it is ours right now. There's also the reality that we have been super, indoctrinated with our Western mind, our Western way of doing things, which includes, capitalism and all this stuff. And so our sacred wisdoms that people were died for and were tortured for and passed down, some people are making them a commodity and selling them. They learn it, then they sell it. They brand it and they sell it. And the truth is, if you walk on the red road and walk a ceremonial path, it is extremely challenging.
Mm-hmm.
The lessons, the learning, it is not easy. You don't just show up, pay money, and get your wisdom. You have to be there. You have to be present. You have to be there in the rain, in the cold. As a moon dancer, we'll moon dance 23 degrees with frost on the ground in the circle, and we're doing it for each other, for our communities. We're doing it for our families. We're doing it for Madre Tierra, for her blood, which is the water. And we don't eat, we don't drink water, and we do sweat lodge when we come in, sweat lodge when we go out. We're all night there. There's a million ceremonies like that. It's hard, and you have to work to set it up, and you have to work to tear it down. And you learn so many deep lessons about yourself in the process of ceremony. And you can't just buy and sell that. And you can't just come across it easy. So do you see already the complexity of the answer? Yes, there's a hunger. Yes, we're here to share it. All of us, right? That's what we always say with the Institute of Chicana Psychology. We're a su servicio, a sus órdenes. We're here to serve you. But that service and that spiritual leadership comes in challenging ways. So yes, learn from elders who know. If someone is teaching you, make sure that they don't just take an online class here and there. Make sure that those people teaching you are in constant accountability and communication with their teachers, not just, oh, I took this class, I took that class, now I'm going to charge $300 for, whatever. No. Make sure that they that they go to ceremony and that they set it up. They shut it down. They clean it up. They're there in everything. Okay, that's one piece. The other piece is, don't be scared away, just because, of that piece. And if you don't have access to your elders, that's okay. Continue to seek them out. Do learn online, but let that learning be personal. Don't sell it. Don't teach it. Because I remember it as like my first year moon dancer, I thought I knew everything. As a fourth year moon dancer, I thought I knew everything. I knew nothing. fifth year, sixth year, seventh year, eighth year, ninth year, 10th, and the more I went along, the more respect and discipline and deep work I had to do to be able to say that I can share this with you all. So it's a both and again. Both be respectful, both make sure your teachers know what they're talking about. And yes, please come, please learn, please feel welcome. This is yours.
Yeah,
does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think that's a beautiful answer. And I think that that's the key, right? The selling, the profit, the appropriation of this medicine that is making it so that is making it confusing to folks. Well, there is this, and if I can just pay for this, then I'm certified to do X, Y, and Z. And it's like,
Right.
that's not what it's about, right? It like you said, it's a personal journey that you must go through, and it takes time to integrate.
And people can come together in groups to share. Oh, I found this online. I'm not sure, but this. Oh, I did this. That's different than proclaiming to be learning something you're really excited about, which is fine, and then proclaiming to be a teacher.
Right.
Because this is a good example of this colonial veil and this way, this kind of what is it when you don't see something the right way?
Like a distortion.
A distorted view, right? Because I think a lot of people think, we have our ancestors, we have these ways that are still present today. They're not just they have been passed on.
Right.
But when we think of that, of reconnecting, we think of 500 years ago, mostly, especially when we're first starting out, like, oh, we're trying to reconnect to our ancestors hundreds of years ago. And then I think we have this unspoken thought that I don't think we think about it because we did, we're like, oh, of course not. But I think we feel like everyone was a teacher, everyone was an elder, everyone, held the medicine. No, it's just like today. Like if you want to use, the example of the Catholic Church, for example, there are only a few priests. There are a lot of followers, but they go on and do their everyday life. They know the religion. They try to practice the religion in their family. They try to learn it. There's a connection to Creator, to God. But very few people will wind up saying, you know what? I have been, for example, a Catholic since I was a kid. I am now a priest. Well, and I'm not necessarily agreeing with the way people become priests. I think it's just a relatable example, right? So if you think about our society in the past, there were priests, you could say of this medicine, and then there were regular people. They knew the medicine. They knew how to honor the spirits. They knew how to honor the elements. But even they wouldn't just say, I am an elder now because I have grown up this way.
Right.
Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. And I think that's the key, right? That because there is this awakening, people want to know, want to connect. And then there's those that there's a lot of people offering this, but they're selling something on a class that they took, and then that's where the harm happens. I believe that because this is soul work. Right? This is not just something that it's not a mental process. This is just how I see it. Right? You can't just learn something like information. It has to be felt and experienced at a soul level.
Absolutely.
And that takes time, right? That takes time. And, I just think, for example, my journey as a therapist, and I think back when I started, as a mental health therapist, back in 2007, I had a lot of book knowledge and I had a lot of that information, but it's taken me this long to be able to integrate all of that into my life and my, because we're also working on our own healing, right? And to integrate that in a more just soulful, spiritual, mental health level, right? It's an integration of all things, and it's taking me this long, right? And so I think about those folks offering spiritual work, and it's like, and it takes time. I'm not saying it's something that only someone of a certain age can do,
right?
But I do feel that it takes a lot of like you said, just putting there's you skin in the game, right? You go through it, and it's not an easy journey,
right,
to navigate, and spiritually
comes up, and if you're haven't done that spiritual work, you could really cause them harm. You could cause yourself harm. So it really, really matters, If something happens in a sweat la Janata Mascal, the example came up with a different elder, and she, there was some harm happening, and she said, well, what did y'all do? And they said, we put our hands on him and we prayed and gave him, energy. She was like, no, you needed to call the EMS because he was having a problem, and you can't just, fake your way through it.
Right.
You cannot. So it's very important to have the years of work.
Yeah, absolutely. The experience, the years, and for what I've heard in from others, that emotionally it is a difficult journey to navigate, because it's almost like, as a person offering the space to others spiritually, and you do go through a process of yourself and healing yourself, and healing from your own wounds and your own quote unquote demons, right? And it's like you go through it, and that is very hard to do, and it's you can say very easily, and you can, but when you really go through it in a deep way, and it's a very difficult journey to navigate as an individual, and then to come through from that and be able to offer that medicine.
Absolutely. That is really, really true.
Yeah.
And there's many things true about that. Even the opposite is true. But again, we could talk forever about any of these questions because they're all so important. But I'm glad that you're investigating and you're asking, because all of your listeners get to get the beginnings of, what these things could mean,
Absolutely. And, so for folks that would love to get more familiar with your work and your organization, how can they find you guys?
The best way to find us is through our website, which is razapsychology.org.
So that's RAZA
psychology.org.
Yeah. And then we're on Instagram as Chican Psych. Yeah, XICAN PSYCH, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we're on Facebook. You can, plus, we always say, once you come to a Platica, we're family, we're community. You can always email us, call us, text us, whatever. We're here to serve each other toward our well-being, our own well-being, our well-being of our children, our families, our loved ones, 7 generations back, 7 generations forward, and our community. So, we have a few things coming up too. The intro level for people just starting to learn. Intro to spirituality, is that what it's called?
Well, it's called spirituality, mental health, and healing. And so
and then the next day is like kind of the next level, indigenous spirituality.
Yeah, it's a 2-part day. And the first, it's all of it is kind of intro, but like the first day is much more introductory, and the second day is much more focusing on indigenous spirituality, wisdom,
May, right?
And that's in May.
And then you have a class coming up.
And then I have explorations in Chicanix identity class. That's a Chicano psychology class. It's online, 6 weeks, and that starts at the end of May. And all of that's on the website.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time and for sharing with us today. I think we need to do another part 2.
Yeah.
I want to know, and I just realized I didn't ask about your story. I normally ask, how you guys came across this path. And so I realized I didn't ask that question. So I definitely would love to have you guys back and share just your journey in navigating all of this.
Everybody is a universe, right? So all of our stories are always so beautiful and so big, right?
Absolutely. And this is such a big topic. There's so many directions to go. So thank you.
It really is.
It is. So thank you for your willingness to share and to give us a very brief intro to this. And I would love to have you guys back sometime.
That would be great. Thank you so much.
I wanted to share some cantos. So next time I'll do a canto for everybody.
Oh, well, we have time if you want to share it.
Ah, okay. I was trying to think of one that talks about
yes,
what we've been talking
please.
about. Okay, so I use the medicine of the panueve, the tambor, the drum. Let's see. So this is called Renace la Fuerza, exactly what we're talking about, reconnecting, right? Renace la fuerza desde bien adentro. Del fondo de la tierra yo invoco a mis ancestros. Renace la fuerza desde bien adentro. Del fondo de la tierra yo invoco a mis ancestros. Gira, crece, sube, expira. El fuego de mis venas transforma todo mal. Gira, crece, sube, expira. Fuego de mis venas transforma todo mal. Cura sana y fluye. Cura sana y fluye. Cura sana y fluye. Cura sana y fluye. Oh, Mateo.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope that you found it healing and nourishing to your mind and soul. If there's a friend that you think would benefit from listening to this information, please share it. Share about our podcast. If you feel called to, please leave us a review, as this really, really helps boost our presence here in Apple Podcasts, and it makes it easier for others to find us. To stay up to date on new episode releases and special events and projects that I'm working on, you can follow us on Instagram at Inner Healing Paths Podcast. And you can subscribe to my newsletter by going to my website, which is rosachettilcsw.com. And I will include this information and links in the show notes. Once again, thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to sharing with you again next time.